that scene between Malcolm and Macduff, why do you think Shakespeare's at pains to kind of to point out all these qualities? Why is he? I mean, Malcolm, says a litany of negative qualities.
Yes, he makes himself sound like a debauched man of sin, and I think, well, there are two things, I suppose. It's that we can compare this act of dissembling in order to get to the truth, which is what it is, to get, in his case, to get to the truth about Macduff, and also for Macduff to get to the truth about him, and for him to test Macduff as a possible ally. I think it's like the exact reverse of what Macbeth is, which is someone who pretends to be outraged in the beginning by the murder of Macduff, and that he was so outraged that he had to kill, by the murder of Duncan, and he was so outraged that he had to kill Duncan's servants as well, and shutting up the any witnesses, right? But that he comes out and it's, I'm so outraged by this terrible thing that's happened to our king, and it's under my roof, horrors, And on the other end of the spectrum is this man who's saying, I'm a terrible man, and yet he's not a terrible man. He's an honest man. So there again, we get that kind of chiasmus pattern of the crossing of features of the personality that Shakespeare's so good at exploring in very symmetrical ways.
Yeah, and really, what the outward face doth show kind of hides what's inside. Do you think Macbeth is a play where Shakespeare's trying to, for the viewer, saying, we as human beings, we are made up of qualities? Do you think in the Elizabethan and Jacobean age, maybe people weren't quite aware of what made up the mind, what made up the human psyche?
I think I wouldn't say they were so much not aware. I just think that they organized that knowledge differently. So their belief in the humors of the body, they were able to cover most kinds of behavior in that rubric, to say, oh, that person is too choleric, they've got too much choler. That person is too full of black bile, they've got too much melancholy. That all of these ways that we formulate ideas of mental illness, sanity, insanity, goodness and evil, they just had different, I think they just had different frameworks for it. And I don't think they were completely wrong. I think they were onto something. They had thought and studied about it for quite a bit. But I do think Shakespeare comes onto the scene, and he is a master of taking the burgeoning questions about what a self is, that were continually being answered and re-answered and reinterrogated. And I think he comes in and takes that, and with Hamlet in particular, but in Macbeth as well, is focused in a new way on the idea of an interiority of the person, that a person can be doing something on the exterior that is not necessarily reflected by what they feel, what they want to do, what they believe. And I don't know if that was an outcome of him being an actor and a playwright, or if that was just an outcome of the notion, that in statecraft, for example, you had Machiavelli saying, it doesn't matter if you're actually faithful, it just matters if you seem to be faithful, right? The ends justify the means. As long as you look good to the people, don't worry about being good. That's not the answer to being a good ruler. So taking all that together, I think what it was the bifurcation that Shakespeare notices of people, the fact that we have an interior reality, we also have what people see of us, and that those two things very often do not match, right? We can be very wrong about who we are, but that's our internal view. But we can also be very right about who we are, and that's our internal view, and someone else may still be wrong about who we are, right? So there's always this kind of disjunction. And I think back to Hamlet, when he says, I have that within which passes show, to his mother, meaning there is something in me, mother, that is real, that isn't about wearing inky cloaks, and that is really mourning my father's death. But you can't stop thinking of this as some kind of act, like that I'm playing sick, right? So I just think that the entire era was actually preoccupied with the idea of identity, and in a way that maybe hadn't been true in the Middle Ages, where identity was your position in the hierarchy. It was you were a yeoman, you were an earl, you were an aristocrat, you were a king or a queen, and that was a definition of your inner as well as your outer world. There wasn't room for you to have, these sort of internal battles of the psychology that we now have. And I think that was something that was coming to, and this is an oldish idea. I'm thinking of some Stephen Greenblatt stuff. I'm also thinking about Harold Bloom and some other critics who've written about the self, the Renaissance self, right? So I'm borrowing a lot, but this is, I think the individual is sort of the capitalist individual is really born in the Renaissance.
Well, and really a lot of and you mentioned Bloom, and Bloom, wrote a book called The Invention of the Human. And so, and from what you're saying, that again, that human beings are made up of an internal self, to your point. Yes. That there's a reality, that it has a reality.
Yes.
You are not who your external position is.
Right.
You are something else.
Right. Or you can be.
Or you can be.
The things can match, but they don't necessarily, which is what makes things confusing.
Yeah. To kind of go back to Banquo versus Macbeth. So they are kind of both presented with information. You both will be royalty to some degree or related to it. One does not act upon it, and one does. Do you think Banquo then maybe is the part of self that resists temptation, or that can resist temptation?
I do. It's almost like a test run. What if you hear these fortunes and you don't act on them? Will they nonetheless come true? What if you do act on them and they nonetheless come true? So yes, I absolutely think there's sort of the two opposed approaches to hearing something puzzling and also very intriguing about one's possible future.
And then at the end, so throughout Shakespeare plays too, he'll paint external things happening in nature that reflect the internal person.
Yes. Yes.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, as we kind of discussed about Lear, the beginning of Lear's breakdown is accompanied by this incredible tempest, this terrible storm outside. In Midsummer Night's Dream, when the fairies are fighting, everything in nature is topsy-turvy. It's too cold in the summer and it's too warm in the winter, and the crops are rotting in the fields because of it. So very often Shakespeare sort of mirrors out a character's state of being, state of mind, or even a domestic disorder or even political disorder will become reflected on the landscape somehow in nature. Nature will kind of copy it somehow. as if at all these different levels at the same time, disorder is the name of the game. It's the state of things. In Macbeth, we have another perfect example of state and domestic disorder in the murder of Duncan under Macbeth's roof. And it's transgressive in 4 different ways. The first way that it's transgressive is it's a transgression of the physical body, that it's a stabbing, right? So we've already crossed that line there. It's also a transgression of the notion of divine right of kings. It's a regicide. He's killing the very anointed king. That is terrible. Moreover, Duncan is his kinsman. So he's killing a member of his own family in a society that was firmly invested in clans that were familially connected groups of people. And then finally, he is killing his own guest. And he even says, I shouldn't be killing the person I should protect against the murderer. I shouldn't be the murderer myself. And whilst this is going on, we learn that there's terrible storms and strange things happen all over in Scotland. That horses are eating each other, that the steeples are crashing down with lightning strikes. So it's another one of the times that Shakespeare says when things are wrong, if they're wrong psychologically, if they're wrong domestically, if they're wrong politically, they're going to be wrong in nature as well.
Mm-hmm.